I'm going to recognize myself for the next 5 minutes. Mr. Taibbi, the Twitter files showed how the State Department's Global Engagement Center, and I know you've done some reporting on this, initially created to counter the foreign disinformation campaigns, ended up censoring American speech directly and by proxy. It was established in 2016, $61 million, 120 employees. And what we found now through further reporting is that at the exit of the Biden administration, they kind of shifted things around to make sure that it was still viable and still could operate. Can you just explain kind of in general what your reporting discovered and what you've seen since then?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Congressman. The Global Engagement Center, which was an organization that was unknown to us when we started the Twitter files, and it started off as a counterterrorist organization. A source that I spoke to that had worked there described the transformation of their mission as CT to CP, counterterrorism to counterpopulism. We found Global Engagement Center reports on a variety of topics within the Twitter files. They also worked with the Stanford Internet Observatory and the Election Integrity Partnership. And at the end of this year, they were set to expire and be defunded. But essentially, what happened was they took the same amount of employees, they renamed themselves R/FEME, and they scattered the employees physically throughout the building in different places to make it impossible or make it more difficult to eradicate the agency. Now, I'm not sure how that has all panned out. My understanding is that ultimately this will be defunded, but those personnel and that money still exists, and they still have exactly the same mission that was delineated for them in 2018 by legislation.
And it was the way that they utilized what was called bad speech and good speech, right? Can you describe how they kind of manipulated things that was presented to the American public? And a lot of this was initiated during COVID, right?
Yeah, so the Global Engagement Center, they had a really important, I think, innovation in the whole evolution of the digital censorship movement. They put out these reports. Some of them were sort of old school intelligence reports where they actually used sources to identify accounts that were reasonably linked to foreign governments or foreign intelligence or might be bots. But then they had this concept they called the information ecosystem, and that just drew in accounts whose messages were too much in sync with those other accounts. And as a result, we had people who were completely innocent and in many cases were prominent politicians, like there were prominent Democratic politicians in Italy, for instance, and in France, who were deemed to be part of the Russian ecosystem or the Iranian ecosystem or the Chinese ecosystem. This is just old school guilt by association, and it was part of their method. We found this repeatedly in their reports.
Yeah, the last question I had was, so as the Biden administration leaves and they morph this group into another kind of different size organization, I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, this is a perfect target for what DOGE is looking at right now, because there's no way to really reform these organizations, especially because it's part of the State Department. So it would be something that Secretary Rubio would absolutely have to go in and either rework start to finish or just eliminate it. Is that correct?
I would think so. And again, the process of scattering the organization throughout the building, and this is a prime example of how it's so difficult to eradicate these institutions once they've taken hold.
Yeah, Mr. Schellenberger, I'll just ask you kind of the final question, and that was just, you talked earlier about these types of organizations that are embedded, and then how do you eliminate them? How do you change them?
I mean, you really have, I mean, my view is that you have to shut them down and reconstitute them with different rules, different leadership, personnel as policy. So, I mean, you can't have somebody heading up CISA that thinks it's their job to go around and to censor their fellow Americans. You've got to have somebody there that's really committed to cybersecurity, which is in their name twice. That's how supposedly committed they are to it. So any organization that has that level of mission drift, I think, you got to shut it down and reconstitute it later, and I hope Congress considers doing that.
Thank you very much. My time has expired.
Mr. Chair, I have a unanimous consent request.